One of the requirements in the papers that I always assign is originality. Did you have a thesis statement or not exactly proving a hypothesis, but did you have a point you were trying to make, and did the paper that you wrote, was it organized around that point, and did you end up developing enough evidence to show that point? So I want to take a minute to look at what I mean by that, by constructing an original thesis, because some students have asked, well, what do you mean by original? How original does it have to be? And others just sometimes struggle with making sure that their paper actually is arguing a point, especially when it's not the full dissertation. Maybe it's just a chapter in the dissertation, like a results chapter or a lit review chapter, but that doesn't get you off the hook. So you still need to actually have a point that you're arguing. All right, so the outline for this short lecture is, first, are you supposed to have a thesis at all in a qualitative study? What is a theory or a thesis? And then I'm going to give some examples of weak theory building techniques and how to fix them. It says 4, but it really is only 3 here. I have the perfunctory theory, the unoriginal theory, and the one-prong theory. And I'll give examples of each of those. And then we'll look at uncovering an author's theory or thesis in other literature that you're reading. Okay, so you're right that in a qualitative study, you don't start with a hypothesis that you go and prove. Instead, you have a question, a research question, you want to find it out. But that doesn't get you off the hook for writing up your chapters in your dissertation as if there's a point that you're trying to show. Once you understand the phenomenon, you need to write your chapters in your dissertation as if you have now understood a phenomenon and you're going to explain it, and the paragraphs will move toward explaining that. So that's a theory. That's the way you develop a theory here or write up the way you write up your theory in a paper. All right, so your dissertation in qualitative research doesn't start with a hypothesis, but that doesn't mean your chapters don't have central understandings. And the way this relates to a lit review chapter is rather than just saying author A said this, and author B said this, and author C said this, that's not really a central understanding. That's not really a point that you're trying to make. Instead, you say, let's say that your lit review was on business's mission in Singapore. It would be unsatisfactory to just write what each author that you read said about business's mission in Singapore. Instead, you have a central understanding. You have a general point you want to make about what it means to do business as mission in Singapore, what makes it effective or ineffective, or what main obstacles are people running into, or whatever. And there, you develop this central understanding, and then your lit review chapter is written about that central understanding. You're going to show how you arrived at that, and then that may cover going through a whole bunch of authors' arguments. All right, so what is this central understanding? A thesis or a theory or central understanding? I'm using them kind of synonymously here, but more technical instances or in specific works, an author might find a need to distinguish between these. But your central understanding is your theory or your point that you're trying to make. And so in this case, it's not a hypothesis, but it is when I say a thesis, it's the point. It's the idea that you're going to show in your paper. Here's a definition from an organization that does business research. A theory is a statement of what causes what and why and under what circumstances. A theory can be a contingent statement or a proven statement. Now, in qualitative studies, we're not really trying to look at dependent and independent variables and such and proving a cause relationship, but we are trying to understand the relationship between two things, or why or under what circumstances. That's why we use words like factors contributing to or implications of. And so that's what a theory does. It describes these connections between things. Okay, here are some perfunctory theses, or what I would just say is like a C- thesis. Here are some examples. Theories about the historical Jesus are variegated. There are as many theories about who Jesus was as there are scholars. yes, you could organize a paper that way, and then you could go through what one scholar said about the historical Jesus and what another said and what another said, and at the end you will have proved your point that lots of authors have lots of ideas about the historical Jesus. So it's true, you could have a cohesive argument, or at least an organized argument that you actually end up proving, but the thesis is just so unoriginal or unimpressive, because all you're saying is lots of people see things in lots of ways. So if you're tempted in your lit review or in your results chapter to just make an argument that, wow, there are lots of ways of seeing things, you might have a satisfactory thesis, but it's not a terribly impressive thesis. And we're not going for satisfactory, we're going for impressive. Here's another example. Paradigms of mission have changed over time. Okay, that's in one sense it's like, well, obvious, but in another sense, yeah, you could certainly prove that by or develop that understanding by going through a bunch of authors' works. But it's just it's basically like the first argument that says there are lots of ways of seeing this, and that's just, there's not a central theory that really organizes the ideas or that really teaches us a lot from that. Another example, Mexican Americans face many challenges. All right, you would want to improve these perfunctory theses, so here are my ideas for fixing them. If you changed, in the literature, there are many views of the role of Christians in society. See, that's like those previous perfunctory theses too. The views of the role of Christians in society can be divided into three camps, which I'll describe below. Okay, that would be more of a central understanding that says there are basically three ways to see this, and I'm going to describe them. Still not terribly impressive, but at least takes a statement like there are many views and boils it down to three. There are four types of challenges that Mexican Americans face. Okay, and then you would describe them, maybe political, religious, social, or whatever. But the point is that you've taken it from there are many challenges to I have organized the data and now understand it as primarily four. Or literature on cargo cults has characterized them as religious movements but has neglected the politics. And so that's a good thesis that you could argue, and you would either use the literature to show the neglect or use the literature that proves that other scholars have noticed the neglect. All right, here are some examples of acceptable but unoriginal theses. Again, they're kind of they're just not impressive enough. Let's say Hebert's middle zone also describes the supernatural worldview of the Mestizo Indians. All right, what's unimpressive is that you have not adapted or made Hebert's middle zone. You haven't shown the ways in which it does not work, or the ways in which your research has contributed to advancing Hebert's theory. All you've done is just applied someone else's theory and said, yeah, it's true in my case too. So yeah, I mean, you could prove that in your, or not exactly prove it, but you could let that be your central point in your paper, and all of the evidence from your interviews and ethnographic data could support that. But how have you actually contributed something new? You've just said that someone else's theory worked. The Tlapaneco have what Lingenfelter and Mayers describe as low grid, high group. So we see this sometimes in doctoral level work where somebody will just feel so in awe of a previous kind of mega scholar, super scholar, like Lingenfelter and Mayer's book on communication, and instead of disagreeing with it or advancing it or changing it, adapting it, just saying, oh, it works, here's how I would apply it to my context. So fine, you could apply another author's work to your context, but not terribly original. The Navajo are what Edward Hall would have called collectivist and egalitarian. Same as the one above, all you've done is applied Edward Hall's work to your situation instead of advancing or creating a new theory. You've just used someone else's theory. Or the Akie hunters have a unique form of Christianity. That's kind of like the perfunctory thesis where instead of describing what is the central understanding of the Akie hunters' Christianity, you've just said it's unique. Instead, try and come up with a theory that within the short thesis statement we know what is original and new, and be a bit more specific. All right, so here are some examples of taking an unacceptable thesis and making it more original. While Ting Tumi's, a scholar on cross-cultural communication, and others' theories of face work bring out some important aspects of upgrading face and saving face that can be applied to Melanesia, each of these theorists fail to capture the way that shaming is connected to behavioral modification. Okay, so what I've done here is I have taken someone else's theory that shows I have a command of it and that I've done the reading, but I've shown that there's still a hole in the data, that new knowledge needs to be added, that there's room for a new theory to be developed. And so the trick is to take one theory and apply it to a new context to show how it needs to be tweaked, or what its implications are for something that no one has thought of before. Maybe, like in this case, no one has thought of how face work is connected to shaming, and so or to behavioral modification, and so now you're going to advance the theory by bringing in other social aspects, religious aspects, political aspects. Something's going to make it original by you adding a new dimension, a new component, or a new relationship. Really, is what you're looking for. A relationship between a previous theory and a new and something else no one has looked at. Here are some examples of truly original theses that have made best-selling books or have endured. Some would say they have a long tail life because they're so original and useful. Here's some examples. There are 4 approaches toward other religions in the Old Testament. That was McDermott's. Instead of saying that the Old Testament has multivocal or many views toward the other religions, he boiled them down to 4. The expansion of the church has followed 6 paradigms throughout history. That's David Bosch's, and you know the 6 paradigms, and so there's an original thesis. He boils down 2,000 years of history to 6 paradigms. Here is a best-selling book, Globalization Has Leveled the Playing Field. This comes from Thomas Friedman's book on globalization. And one central understanding of what globalization has done made it so that people in all market economies have an equal chance for competition. Okay, God created us to be culture makers. That's Andy Crouch's thesis. Rituals have 3 parts: initiation, liminal, and aggregation. This is Van Gennep's theory about rites of passage. Protestantism leads to a work ethic that caused the Industrial Revolution. So you know that this is Max Weber's thesis that has endured over time because it was original and substantiated and actually added knowledge instead of just saying there are many views of work or something like that. Okay, now here's another example of a weak thesis, a one-pronged thesis, where maybe you just say, where you just looked at X without understanding its impact on Y, or its connection to Y, or how W led to X. Let me give you some examples. There are many refugees in North Korea. Okay, you could argue that, you could prove it, that would be a central understanding of your paper. But it doesn't have any relationship to something else. What's the political impact, or the religious impact, or what's its impact on some other area of life? Anti-American sentiment takes 3 major forms. Okay, well, you know, that's a bit better than just a perfunctory thesis, and it may be original, but it's not looking at, it's not comparing it to some other relationship or bringing in some other impact. And then African Americans don't graduate from college in proportionally the same numbers as whites. And let's look at how some of these theses were fixed to be what I call a 2-pronged thesis. Look for a connection between X and Y. So with my example of anti-American sentiment having 3 forms, I've turned it into a 2-pronged thesis by saying the purpose of the study is to understand how anti-American sentiment affects mission strategy. So you see, now I've just looked at one phenomenon, anti-American sentiment, and its impact on another phenomenon, mission strategy. And so I'm looking for a connection between X and Y. That makes it more original. It's called a 2-pronged, or I've called it that. Another example, the purpose of this study is to understand whether coming from an educationally supportive home affects the college experience for African Americans. So instead of just looking at the phenomenon of they're not graduating from college in the same amount, you're looking for some other relationship, and in this case it's educationally supportive homes. And that was a dissertation that came through Cook. Okay, now how do you uncover the thesis in another author's work? I suggest go to the book reviews. Read the 400 to 600 word book reviews that are published in scholarly journals on an author's work, and that will help you see what the truly original contribution was, instead of just summarizing a 500-page book by going from paragraph to paragraph to paragraph. you can really see what was seminal, what was the author's main point. So that's your goal. You're going for original.